Think you know everything about this 90s biopic? Think again. From Michael Jackson's rejected role to accidentally dropping dogs out windows, from soundtrack songs that topped UK charts to 15-year script battles and famous houses masquerading as movie sets, Why Do Fools Fall in Love hides some of the most bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets in Hollywood history. These jaw-dropping facts will completely change how you see this Halle Berry, Vivica Fox, and Lela Rochon courtroom drama. Fact 1. Michael Jackson's missing moment. When screenwriter Tina Andrews first completed her script for Why Do Fools Fall in Love, she had someone very different in mind for the lead role than the actor who eventually brought Frankie Lyman to life on screen. Before Larenz Tate ever stepped into the recording studio scenes or learned Lyman's signature dance moves, the part was originally offered to none other than Michael Jackson, the king of pop himself. This casting choice would have been absolutely fascinating to witness, considering Jackson's own complicated relationship with fame that began at a young age, much like Lyman's story. Both artists experienced the pressures of childhood stardom and the entertainment industry's demands, which could have brought an incredibly authentic layer to Jackson's portrayal of the doomed doo-wop singer. Jackson himself had risen to fame as a child with the Jackson 5 in the 1970s, so he understood firsthand what it meant to navigate adult relationships and personal struggles while living under the constant spotlight. The timing of this offer is particularly intriguing because Andrews spent 15 years trying to get her screenplay produced, meaning Jackson could have been approached at various points during the 1980s or early 1990s when his career was at different stages. During this period, Jackson was experimenting with acting projects and considering various film roles, though he was notoriously selective about his movie appearances. Ultimately, Jackson passed on the opportunity, and the role went to Larenz Tate, who delivered a magnetic performance as the charismatic but troubled singer. While we can only imagine how Jackson might have interpreted Lyman's complex personality and tragic downward spiral, Tate's portrayal captured both the charm and the destructive tendencies that defined Frankie Lyman's short but impactful life. The decision to cast Tate instead proved to be the right choice for bringing this particular story to the screen. Fact 2. The 15-year script struggle. Tina Andrews, who had made her mark as an actress on shows like Days of Our Lives and Roots, faced one of Hollywood's longest uphill battles when she decided to tell the story of Frankie Lyman and his 3 wives. From the moment she finished writing her screenplay for Why Do Fools Fall in Love until the cameras finally started rolling, an incredible 15 years passed, making this one of the most persistently pursued projects in film history. Andrews originally wrote the script as an actress-turned-screenwriter who was passionate about bringing this complex story to the screen, but getting Hollywood executives to greenlight a biographical drama about a 1950s doo-wop singer proved to be an enormous challenge. The entertainment industry was hesitant to invest in what they saw as a niche story about a relatively obscure musical figure, despite the compelling legal drama surrounding Lyman's 3 simultaneous marriages and the fight over his song royalties. During those 15 long years, Andrews watched countless other projects get fast-tracked to production while her screenplay sat on shelves and made the rounds through various studios and production companies. She had to navigate changing industry trends, shifting executive priorities, and the constant challenge of keeping her project relevant as different musical biopics came and went from theaters. The persistence finally paid off when director Gregory Nava, fresh off his success with Selena, became attached to the project and helped bring the necessary star power and industry credibility to move the film forward. The wait also allowed Andrews to refine her screenplay over time, incorporating new research and perspectives that may not have been available when she first started writing. When Why Do Fools Fall in Love finally reached theaters in 1998, it represented not just the culmination of Andrews' vision, but also a testament to the kind of determination required to bring challenging stories to Hollywood screens. Fact 3. Selena's secret crew connection. When director Gregory Nava took on Why Do Fools Fall in Love, he made a strategic decision that would help ensure the film's authentic 1950s and 60s period atmosphere by bringing back most of the same technical crew that had worked with him on his previous biographical music film Selena just 1 year earlier. This behind-the-scenes reunion meant that the cinematographer, production designer, costume designer, and many other key department heads who had just finished recreating the world of Tejano music in the 1990s were now tasked with diving into the doo-wop era of decades earlier. The crew had already proven their ability to capture the look, feel, and cultural authenticity of a specific musical time period, making them the perfect team to tackle another music biography with completely different visual and stylistic requirements. The connection between these two films goes deeper than just shared personnel, as both projects required meticulous attention to period details, from the costumes and hairstyles to the recording studio equipment and concert venues. The crew's experience with Selena had given them valuable expertise in working with musical performance scenes, understanding how to light and shoot musical numbers, and creating authentic backstage and recording environments that would feel genuine to audiences. This crew continuity also meant that Nava could work with people he trusted and who understood his directorial vision, allowing the production to move more efficiently and focus on the storytelling rather than getting bogged down in technical communication issues. The shared experience from Selena created a shorthand between the director and his department heads that proved invaluable when bringing Frankie Lyman's story to life. The technical team's previous work on recreating the music industry of the 1990s for Selena prepared them perfectly for the challenge of authentically portraying the very different but equally important music scene of the 1950s. Fact 4. The accidental dog death scene. One of the most shocking and disturbing moments in Why Do Fools Fall in Love occurs when Frankie Lyman, played by Lorenz Tate, accidentally drops his wife's small dog out of an apartment window to its death, creating a scene that left many viewers deeply upset and sparked considerable discussion among audiences about the character's increasingly erratic behavior. The scene unfolds during a tense domestic argument when Frankie, who is drunk and agitated, grabs his wife's pet dog and holds it outside the window as a threatening gesture during their heated confrontation. What makes this moment particularly tragic is that it was portrayed as an unintentional accident rather than a deliberate act of cruelty, as the frightened dog bites Frankie's hand while he's holding it outside, causing him to reflexively let go and drop the animal. This disturbing sequence serves as a pivotal moment in the film that demonstrates how Frankie's drug addiction and personal struggles had begun affecting everyone and everything around him, including innocent animals caught in the chaos of his deteriorating relationships. The filmmakers used this incident to show the tragic consequences of his increasingly unstable mental state and substance abuse problems, without suggesting that he intentionally wanted to harm the pet. Movie audiences had extremely strong reactions to this scene, with many viewers expressing that it was the most difficult moment to watch in the entire film, even more so than the human drama and violence depicted elsewhere in the story. The incident became one of the most memorable and controversial elements of the movie, with some fans saying it was the moment they completely lost sympathy for Frankie's character, despite his tragic circumstances. The scene remains a stark reminder of how addiction and personal turmoil can lead to devastating unintended consequences that affect innocent victims. Fact 5. Little Richard's dual existence. Why Do Fools Fall in Love features one of the most unique casting decisions in biographical film history, with the legendary Little Richard appearing as two different versions of himself across different time periods within the same movie. The real Little Richard, who was a close friend of Frankie Lyman and had toured with him during the 1950s, appears as himself in the courtroom scenes that take place during the 1980s legal battle over Lyman's estate. However, when the story flashes back to the 1950s to show Frankie's early career and rise to fame, viewers see a completely different actor portraying the young Little Richard during his rock and roll heyday. Miguel A. Nunez Jr., who was known for his comedic roles in films like The Return of the Living Dead and later Juana Man, took on the challenging task of embodying the flamboyant energy and distinctive style that made Little Richard one of rock and roll's most influential pioneers. This unusual casting approach created an interesting dynamic where audiences could see both the older, more mature Little Richard, reflecting on his memories of Frankie Lyman from the perspective of someone who had lived through those experiences, and then watch a younger actor recreate the wild, energetic performances that defined Little Richard's early career. The decision to use two different people for the same character allowed the filmmakers to maintain authenticity in both time periods without relying on heavy makeup or digital effects to age or de-age the real Little Richard. Critics noted that Nunez Jr.'s portrayal captured the explosive stage presence and distinctive vocal style that made Little Richard such an important figure in early rock and roll, while the real Little Richard's courtroom appearance added genuine historical weight to the legal proceedings that formed the backbone of the film's narrative structure. Fact 6. The Morris Levy copyright paradox. One of the most ironic contradictions in Why Do Fools Fall in Love involves the film's treatment of record producer Morris Levy, played by Paul Mazursky, who is portrayed as a villain who illegally stole songwriting credits from Frankie Lyman, yet his name still appears in the movie's own soundtrack credits as a legitimate co-writer of those same songs. Throughout the film, Maurice Levy is depicted as a manipulative music industry executive who exploited young artists by adding his name to songs he had nothing to do with creating, essentially stealing royalties that rightfully belong to the original songwriters. The movie makes it clear that Levy earned extra money from hits like Why Do Fools Fall in Love, A BC's of Love, and I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent by falsely listing himself as a co-writer, even though he never contributed any lyrics, melodies, or musical ideas to these tracks. This unethical practice was a common way for powerful industry figures to take advantage of young, inexperienced musicians who didn't understand the business side of the music world and often signed contracts without proper legal representation. The film presents Levy's actions as a clear example of how the music industry systematically cheated artists out of their rightful earnings during the 1950s and 60s. However, despite exposing this fraudulent behavior as a central plot point and portraying it as morally wrong throughout the entire movie, the filmmakers still included Maurice Levy's name in the official soundtrack credits as a writer or co-writer of these very same songs. This strange decision meant that the movie was simultaneously condemning Levy's theft of songwriting credits while also perpetuating that same theft by continuing to give him official credit for songs he didn't actually write, creating a bizarre real-world echo of the very injustice the film was trying to expose. Fact 7. The Diana Ross date disaster. Why Do Fools Fall in Love contains one of the most glaring timeline mistakes in movie history when characters in scenes set during 1985 repeatedly discuss Diana Ross's cover version of Why Do Fools Fall in Love, as if it's a brand new hit song that just came out, when in reality Ross had released her version 4 years earlier in 1981. This continuity error occurs during the prison scenes at Lamberton Prison, where the story shows how Diana Ross's successful cover of Frankie Lyman's original song motivated his 3 widows to pursue legal action over his estate and song royalties. The characters talk about Ross's version as though it's currently climbing the charts and generating fresh interest in Lyman's music, but the timeline doesn't match up with the actual release dates. Diana Ross's cover of Why Do Fools Fall in Love was actually released on September 25, 1981, as the lead single from her album of the same name when she signed with RCA Records after leaving Motown. The song became a major hit for Ross, reaching number 7 on the Billboard Pop Singles chart and number 4 in the United Kingdom, which did indeed spark renewed interest in Frankie Lyman's original music and the complicated legal situation surrounding his estate. The mistake creates an odd situation where the movie's central premise about what triggered the legal battle is based on accurate historical facts, but the timing presented in the film is completely wrong. By 1985, Ross's version would have been old news rather than the hot new release that supposedly inspired the 3 women to take action. This type of dating error is particularly noticeable in a biographical film that relies heavily on specific historical events and their chronological relationship to each other to tell its story effectively. Fact 8. The Spice Girls soundtrack surprise. While Why Do Fools Fall in Love may not have been a massive box office success, it produced one of 1998's biggest musical surprises when Melanie Brown, better known as Scary Spice from the Spice Girls, teamed up with rising hip-hop star Missy Elliott for a song that would become the movie's most successful element and Brown's career-defining solo achievement. The collaboration on I Want You Back came about when Missy Elliott, who was executive producing the movie's contemporary soundtrack album, reached out to Brown while the Spice Girls were still touring and asked if she would be interested in recording a duet. According to Brown, Elliott had written the song and specifically wanted her to be featured on it, making this one of the first major solo ventures for any member of the world's biggest girl group at the time. The song was recorded in just one afternoon, but it went on to achieve something that none of Brown's later solo efforts would match by shooting straight to number 1 on the UK singles chart in September of 1998. This made Brown the first Spice Girl to achieve a solo number 1 hit and marked both her first and only time reaching the top of the charts without her bandmates. I Want You Back sold over 218,000 copies and became the 82nd best-selling single of 1998 in the United Kingdom, proving that Brown could hold her own as a solo artist. The success was particularly impressive because Missy Elliott wasn't yet a household name in Britain and wouldn't score her own UK top 10 hit until Get Her Freak On reached the charts 3 years later in 2001. The The track's futuristic production and Brown's confident vocal performance created a sound that was completely different from anything the Spice Girls had released. Fact 9. The famous house cameo. One of the most architecturally significant locations featured in Why Do Fools Fall in Love is the legendary Stall House, also known as Case Study House Number 22, a stunning mid-century modern home perched high in the Hollywood Hills that has become one of the most photographed and filmed houses in American history. Built in 1959 by architect Pierre Koenig, the Stall House features floor-to-ceiling glass walls, clean geometric lines, and a spectacular infinity pool that seems to float above the sprawling Los Angeles cityscape below. The house became internationally famous thanks to photographer Julius Schulman's iconic 1960 image showing two women sitting in the living room with the glittering city lights stretching endlessly behind them through the massive glass windows. By the time Why Do Fools Fall in Love was filmed in the 1990s, the Stall House had already established itself as Hollywood's go-to location for projects needing a sophisticated, modern backdrop that screamed luxury and style. The house had previously appeared in music videos, commercials, and films, including an early 1960s Italian movie called Smog, where the crew actually had to spray fake pollution on the windows to match the film's environmental theme. The decision to use the Stall House for scenes in Why Do Fools Fall in Love was particularly interesting because the ultra-modern architectural style created a striking visual contrast with the 1950s period story being told. The house's sleek, futuristic design served as a perfect representation of the glamorous lifestyle that successful recording artists like Frankie Lyman could achieve at the height of their careers. The Stall family, who still owned the house during filming, had grown accustomed to sharing their home with film crews and photographers, making it a surprisingly accessible location for movie productions despite its status as an architectural landmark. Fact 10. The soundtrack's split personality. Warner Music Group made an unusual decision for Why Do Fools Fall in Love by releasing two completely separate soundtrack albums on the exact same day, September 8, 1998, creating one of the most confusing marketing strategies in movie soundtrack history. The two albums had almost nothing in common except for sharing the movie's title, and they were aimed at entirely different audiences with completely different musical tastes. The first album, called Why Do Fools Fall in Love, original versions from the movie, was released by Rhino Records and contained 14 authentic songs from the 1950s and 60s, including 5 original recordings by Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, along with classic hits by Little Richard, the Platters, the Shirelles, and Otis Redding. This album actually featured music that appeared in the film and matched the period setting of Frankie Lyman's story. The second album, titled Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Music from and inspired by the motion picture, was released simultaneously through East West Records and Elektra Records in partnership with Missy Elliott's label, The Goldmine Incorporated. This contemporary album was executive produced by Missy Elliott and Timbaland and featured brand new hip-hop and R&B tracks by artists like Elliott herself, Busta Rhymes, En Vogue, Destiny's Child, and Melanie Brown, with most songs having absolutely no connection to the actual movie. Except for one vintage Little Richard song, the contemporary album consisted entirely of modern recordings that were practically unrelated to the film's plot, characters, or time period. Only one track, Gina Thompson's version of Why Do Fools Fall in Love, actually interpolated the original Teenagers' hit and was featured during the movie's end credits, making it the sole musical bridge between the film and its contemporary soundtrack. Fact 11. The Urban World Festival debut. Why Do Fools Fall in Love had its world premiere at the Urban World Film Festival in New York City on August 8, 1998, giving the movie a special debut in front of an audience that was particularly well-suited to appreciate its story about African-American music history and the complex legal drama surrounding Frankie Lyman's legacy. The Urban World Film Festival was founded in 1997 as a showcase for films by and about people of color, making it the perfect venue for a biographical drama that explored the often overlooked stories of early rock and roll pioneers like Lyman and the challenges they faced in the music industry. The festival provided a platform for movies that might not receive the same attention at larger, more mainstream film festivals, and it had quickly become an important launching pad for films featuring diverse casts and culturally significant stories. By choosing Urban World for the premiere, Warner Brothers demonstrated their understanding that this particular story would resonate strongly with audiences who had personal or cultural connections to the music and experiences depicted in the film. The festival setting allowed the cast, including Halle Berry, Vivica Fox, Lela Rochon, and Larenz Tate, to present their work to an audience that could fully appreciate both the historical significance of Frankie Lyman's contributions to music and the ongoing relevance of the legal and personal struggles portrayed in the movie. The 3-week gap between the Urban World premiere and the wide theatrical release on August 28 gave the filmmakers valuable time to gauge audience reactions and build word-of-mouth buzz before the movie opened in over 1,300 theaters across the country. This strategy of using specialized film festivals as testing grounds before wide releases was becoming increasingly common for movies targeting specific demographic groups or dealing with particular cultural themes. Fact 12. The Rashomon reference. Film critics repeatedly drew comparisons between Why Do Fools Fall in Love and Akira Kurosawa's legendary 1950 Japanese film Rashomon, noting how both movies used a similar storytelling technique where the same events are retold from multiple perspectives, with each version revealing different details and contradictions that leave audiences questioning what really happened. In Kurosawa's Rashomon, 4 different characters give conflicting accounts of a single violent incident in a forest, with each person's version serving their own interests and making themselves look better while casting doubt on the other's credibility. Why Do Fools Fall in Love employed this same narrative structure by having Frankie Lyman's 3 wives each tell their own version of their relationship with him during the courtroom proceedings, with each woman's flashbacks painting herself as the true love of his life, while suggesting the other 2 were less important or legitimate. Elizabeth Waters, portrayed by Vivica Fox, presents herself as Frankie's devoted first wife who supported him through his struggles, while Zola Taylor, played by Halle Berry, depicts their relationship as a glamorous romance between 2 successful recording artists. Meanwhile, Amira Eagle, portrayed by Lela Rochon, claims to be his only legal wife and the one who truly reformed him during his final years. The Rashomon-like structure allowed director Gregory Nava to explore how memory, self-interest, and the passage of time can shape people's recollections of the same events in dramatically different ways. Critics noted that this storytelling approach was particularly effective for a story about a man whose life was filled with contradictions and whose relationships were complicated by his drug addiction, multiple marriages, and the chaos surrounding his career. The technique also perfectly suited the legal setting, where each woman's testimony was designed to support her claim to Frankie's estate. Fact 13. The prison setting paradox. Why Do Fools Fall in Love opens with scenes set at Lamberton Prison in 1985, where one of Frankie Lyman's wives is supposedly incarcerated, but eagle-eyed viewers who try to research this correctional facility will discover that no such prison has ever existed in the United States, making it a completely fictional location created specifically for the movie. The filmmakers chose to invent a prison name rather than use an actual correctional facility, which is a common practice in Hollywood when dealing with sensitive subject matter that involves real institutions. Using a fictional prison name allowed the production team to avoid any potential legal complications or negative associations that might arise from filming scenes at or referencing a real prison, while also preventing any real correctional facilities from being connected to the movie's storyline. This decision to create Lamberton Prison reflects the careful balance that biographical films must strike between telling true stories and avoiding unnecessary conflicts with real people, places, and institutions that might object to their portrayal on screen. While the legal battles over Frankie Lyman's estate were based on actual court cases, the specific details of where his wives might have been during the 1980s were either unknown to the filmmakers or deemed irrelevant to the story they wanted to tell. The fictional prison setting serves as a dramatic device to establish the passage of time between Frankie's death in 1968 and the legal proceedings that began in the 1980s, while also providing a backdrop that emphasizes how the consequences of Frankie's complicated personal life continued to affect the people who loved him long after his passing. The prison scenes help establish the motivation for the 3 women to pursue their claims to his estate and royalties. Fact 14. The original song title secret. The song that would become one of the most recognizable hits of the 1950s and give the movie its title originally had a completely different name when the teenagers, who were calling themselves the Premiers at the time, first auditioned it for record producer George Goldner in late 1955. The original title was "Why Do Birds Sing So Gay?", which sounds quite different from the version that eventually became famous around the world. The song was written by Herman Santiago, one of the original members of the Teenagers, who had been working on lyrics that fit with a specific chord pattern he had developed. Santiago's original lyrics included the line, "Why do birds sing so gay?", which was part of his broader songwriting approach at the time, and the word gay in this context meant happy or joyful, which was the common usage of the term during the 1950s. During the audition process with George Goldner, who was impressed by young Frankie Lyman's distinctive high-tenor voice, several changes were made to the song to better showcase Lyman's vocal abilities and to make the song more commercially appealing. Goldner suggested modifications to some of the lyrics, including changing the title from "Why Do Birds Sing So Gay?" to "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?", which created a more direct and emotionally compelling question that audiences could easily relate to. The transformation of the title represented more than just a simple word change, as it shifted the song's focus from a whimsical observation about nature to a more universal question about human emotions and romantic relationships. This change helped make the song more accessible to a broader audience and contributed to its eventual success when it was released on January 10, 1956, reaching #1 on the R&B charts. Fact 15. The real-life footnote twist. While Why Do Fools Fall in Love concludes with a satisfying courtroom victory showing Amira Eagle winning Frankie Lyman's estate, the reality behind the legal battles was far more complicated and messy, with court cases, appeals, and reversals continuing for many years after the movie's timeline ends, proving that real life rarely provides the clean resolutions that Hollywood prefers. The film presents Amira's victory as the final word on who was Frankie's legitimate widow and rightful heir to his musical legacy, but the actual legal proceedings stretched on for decades with multiple court decisions that contradicted each other and left the question of ownership in constant flux. The original Teenagers members Herman Santiago and Jimmy Merchant successfully won songwriting credits for "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" in December of 1992, which seemed to settle one major aspect of the case. However, this victory was short-lived because their ruling was overturned by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, which decided that Santiago and Merchant had waited too long to bring their case to court. This reversal gave the song rights back to Frankie Lyman and Morris Levy, essentially undoing years of legal work and returning the situation to its previous state. The appeals process continued even further when the case was taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, though the highest court in the land declined to hear the matter, leaving the lower court's decision to stand. Throughout these ongoing legal battles, the question of which woman was truly Frankie's legal wife remained tangled up with the broader issues of who owned the rights to his music and who deserved to benefit financially from his creative work. By the time the movie was released in 1998, the real-life legal saga was still unresolved, making the film's neat conclusion somewhat misleading about the actual complexity of the situation.